Hi, viewers. My name is Upesh Jain, founder and host of the Exec Talk channel, here with Dilip Saraf, LinkedIn's top career coach. In this series, Discuss with Dilip, we talk about a variety of topics that will benefit you in your professional and personal life. The topic today is pros and cons of consulting jobs. So, Dilip, this is a topic that's near and dear to a lot of people. A lot of people who are employed, are employees in a company, sometimes think about branching off into their consulting jobs, or sometimes situations might force them to think about consulting jobs. What has been your experience in people who approach you uh, with this consulting jobs topic?
Good point. Especially in this job market, I think it's become more and more of a pursuit that people are doing, especially people in their mid 40s and mid 50s, especially those who have either lost a job
Mhm.
or feel uncertain about their future in the jobs that they have. And here is my response to that kind of a interest that
Mhm.
these career people have. There are two types of consulting jobs that you can pursue. One, of course, is individual consulting, which is you find somebody that you know from the company that you're working with or people associated with you and tell them that you would like to engage with them to show you how to do something in the environment that you understand, which is what I call episodic consulting, right? You know somebody, you know their problem, you go engage with them, and it's something that cannot go beyond that. In other words, you have to find another gig with
Mhm.
somebody else. And that's always a risky thing because you don't know if you're going to get another gig because you got the gig because people you knew what you did. And so you have to develop that brand, you have to develop the message, you have to develop the impact. And all of that takes time. And my experience personally, because I have done that part, particularly
Mhm.
when I lost my first job, it takes about 3 years for you to establish that
Mhm.
and doesn't always work. And the problem with that is it's highs and lows. You can
Mhm.
have a job for a year, and at the end of that, you have nothing because you haven't marketed yourself. You spent all the time nursing that job that you had and collected your paycheck, if you will, or your consulting fees. So that's the risk you have. The other side of consulting is going into established consulting companies like BCG, McKinsey, many strategic companies that are there, or even operational companies that are there. The limitation of that, or the problem with that, is most of those companies don't hire somebody coming out of the corporate world in the middle of their career, especially at 45, 50, 55 or so,
Right.
because they don't understand the consulting rubric, as I call it, the
Mhm.
consulting framework, which is different from engaging in a job that gives you a paycheck at the corporate in the corporate world. And
Right.
the consulting rubric is how do you engage a client? How do you frame the problem? How do you define a solution? How you sell the solution? And how you deliver the solution? That's the rubric, consulting rubric.
Right.
And it's usually learned in the early part of your career, straight out of MBA, for example.
Mhm.
Most of the MBAs are hired by consulting companies, and they put them through the first 2, 3 years of showing them how the consulting rubric works. And then they become consultants,
Right.
right? BCG and McKinsey and other companies.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to train somebody at that seniority
Mhm.
because the client will see you as a gray haired person, not knowing what the consulting rubric is, and it simply won't work.
Mhm.
So they don't typically hire somebody from the corporate world coming into the consulting world because of this limitation. So it's futile
Mhm.
to pursue that path unless you have your own consulting boutique that you know the clients, you know where to engage and so forth. And there are a lot of those people, but once again, you don't have the umbrella of a large consulting company
Mhm.
helping you. So
I see.
that's the limitation you have. The other side of that is if you are already a consultant, let's say at McKinsey or whatever, right, that you've done consulting and here you are at 40, 45,
Mhm.
you want to go into the corporate world, which is also many of my clients have done.
Yeah.
And the problem with that transition is the metaphor I give is the consulting world is what I call the Greek world, and I'll tell you what that means.
Mhm.
And the corporate world is the Roman world.
Mhm.
And by Greek world, I mean thinking, conceptualizing, ideating. That's what Greeks did. They're
Mhm.
philosophers.
Mhm.
They identify a problem, they tell you what the solution is, and they write a report.
Mhm.
That's what consultants do. So the reason I use this Greek metaphor is that's what Greeks did. They're philosophers.
Mhm.
So they never actually implement, execute anything. They just tell you what's wrong with your company, write a report and leave. And it's
Right.
up to you to execute it,
Mhm.
right? Now that gets in the way for their being seen as somebody who can actually execute in the corporate world. And that's what I call the Roman world,
Mhm.
where you have the shield and the sword and you fight out and you execute and you
Mhm.
get the results. That's
Right.
the Roman world,
Mhm.
right? So going from Greek to Roman is a major transition.
Absolutely.
And I have done that with several clients. But I'll give you an example of one client who came out of a strategy consulting and he had done that for 20 years and he was about 48, I think, at the time.
Mhm.
And he said, Dilip, I want to go into the corporate world. I said, look, so I said, let's do an interview. Let's say you're interviewing with a corporate
Mhm.
executive, and I will ask you questions. You answer it. And we did the mock interview, and very within a half hour of that interview, it's clear that he was talking theory. He was talking Greek language.
Mhm.
I said, I don't hear anything that says you actually executed anything. So
Right.
here is what we're going to do. We're going to give you an exercise in your own company, which is a consulting company,
Mhm.
to initiate something that needs changing, and you're going to execute it
Mhm.
as an employee of that consulting company. And I will help you through it, and let's review it at the end of the year.
Mhm.
So he did that. He was actually placed in Turkey, actually,
Mhm.
their office.
Mhm.
And he found a way to initiate something. He proposed it. His bosses loved it. And they said, oh, why don't you go initiate it and execute it? And he executed it successfully.
Mhm.
So at the end of the year, he has a story to tell.
Right.
So then we went into the corporate world, applied for a corporate VP job.
Mhm.
And I coached him on how to interview and so forth. And he aced it and he became a VP. And 8, 9, 10 years later now, he is the CEO of a company, which is a biotech company,
Mhm.
San Diego.
Nice.
So it's doable, but that's the steps you have to go through from
Right.
Greek to Roman to showing you can do it. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And most people think, oh, that's no big deal. It is a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, while listening to you, uh, I mean, mostly what we've been talking about is the business and strategy consulting, right?
Yeah.
Which
Mhm.
is pretty high level at the CXO level, perhaps, or the
Right.
corporate level.
Correct.
Uh, I could not help but think about how this would apply to the Silicon Valley and
Mhm.
high tech companies,
Mhm.
right? Because uh, in the case of people who work in high tech, if
Uh-huh.
they want to branch off into consulting,
Right.
generally speaking, it would be in some domain of high tech, right?
Right. Correct.
Or creating teams that could be loaned out to help people
Yeah.
deliver turnkey projects or statement of works or things of that nature.
Mhm.
So, what are your thoughts on high tech consulting?
I call that particular domain pair of hands consulting. What that means is
Hmm.
that let's say that you worked at Intel. In fact, I have a client who just done that, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
He's a VP level client who was very good at doing chips,
Hmm.
physical chips, designing all of that stuff, right?
Semiconductors, yeah.
Semiconductors, right?
Hmm.
And so he came to me after he got out of Intel and he said, Dilip, how do I get another job? And his area of work was so specific. that the 2 or 3 interviews I did came up short,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I said, then why don't you find somebody who is engaged in that level of chip design and act as a consultant to show them how to do it better? It's a startup, right? And so he found a company like that. And he said that, look, if you're doing this generative AI chip, here are some of the things you don't know. And here are the things I can bring to you to show you how to get to the market faster, because the whole AI thing is moving so fast. If you miss the first round of your iteration, you will lose the market.
Right.
And they bought it. And
Mm-hmm.
now he's consulting with them. And he's a pair of hands. In other words, he's showing them how to actually lay out a chip, how to do the testing, how to, do the first spin and come out right.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is what I call the pair of hands consulting, which means he's not conceptualizing anything. He's not building frameworks. He's
Mm-hmm.
showing them how to push electrons,
Right. So
right?
it's highly technical and hands-on, basically.
Hands on, and that's what I call pair of hands.
Yeah.
So he became available as a pair of hands, expert hands,
Mm-hmm.
that they really couldn't do without.
So would you apply the same method to spinning off into a high-tech consulting job if you were in a
If
high?
you have that specific expertise
Right.
that somebody wants,
Yeah.
that is transportable,
Mm-hmm.
then you are, once again, I just want to make sure that distinction is clear. You are a pair of hands with
Mm-hmm.
expertise.
Yeah.
You're not a consultant in the sense that you don't bring generic knowledge of the consulting framework. You just one thing, you know how to push electrons. You know what I'm saying? As an example,
Mm-hmm.
as an example. And there are a lot of those consultants who are very expert in the specific area,
Right.
but that's all they do. And then they are but consultant just for that. And there are people like that, but they go from stint to stint. And because, once that job is done, they're out of work.
Right. So if you were to summarize this, both domains included the strategic consulting and high-tech consulting.
Mhm.
Uh, what 2, 3 steps would you have to go through to transition um, to a consulting job, and what would be the pros and cons of that in a nutshell?
Okay, so there is one thing I didn't say, and I think it's important.
Mhm.
Uh, Especially when you're trying to get into consulting at a company like McKinsey, BCG, and whatever, right? That when they expect you to come as an employee at that level of seniority, because at 45,
Mhm.
50, most people make partners in the consulting companies, not
Mhm.
just consultants or senior consultants.
Mhm.
They become partners, which is probably at the upper end of their ladder, right?
Right.
They expect you to bring a book of business. In other words,
Mhm.
their expectation is that they are hiring you not just because you bring certain expertise,
Mhm.
but you bring a client network that will follow you and engage you almost immediately after you're on board.
Yeah, I see.
And if you don't have that, they're not interested,
Right.
right? So I just want to make that clear. I didn't mention that earlier in the
Yeah,
conversation.
in traditional terms, that's the Rolodex, right? That you
That's
bring.
the Rolodex, but not just the Rolodex, but you can make a phone call and engage yourself.
Mhm.
Basically, it is Rolodex, but it's more than that. In other words, you can
Yes.
start billing them month after you join. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's what they're looking for.
So a
So,
revenue stream
so
associated with it.
revenue stream, they can bench you at that level of your salary level. So to answer your question, depending on, once again, there are two things, right?
Mhm.
Going from the corporate world into consulting, and we talked about that. So you have to have either strong connections that you can carry a book of business with you and understand what the consulting rubric is and sell them on that. But the other way, which is from consulting into the corporate world,
Mhm.
requires some reprogramming, as I said to you before, going from Greek to Roman mindset.
Mhm.
And that requires some proof points for you to show you've done it. Like I did this with my client, which took a year. And then I had to help him change his language, the way he expressed himself,
Yeah.
all of that, right?
Yeah. Execution is always harder
It is
than.
much hard. That's why I call him Romans. You kill or die, right?
So
It's a morbid metaphor, but that's how it is.
yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if
Okay.
that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I mean, and you know, what would be the two pros and cons for this, just to summarize,
Pros and cons of what now? I'm sorry.
of getting into the consulting business?
Oh, but consulting, once again, business being you are a solo consultant, what I call a pair of hands,
Right,
right?
right.
The pros are you go into a very specific application area
Mhm,
where you show them how to do it.
mhm.
But once you show them how to do it, when that is over, you have to market all over again,
Right.
or you're limited in your reach in how you market yourself because your expert is so specific that there is not a broader reach for you to get
Mhm.
ongoing employment. You understand what I'm saying?
Okay.
So that's the pair of hands problem.
Okay.
The other problem is
Mhm.
if you go from corporate world to consulting, then you need to take with you a book of business, that's the con, which you probably don't have,
Yeah.
or, and actually not or, you
Mhm.
don't have a good understanding of what consulting rubric is, which is
Right.
how to engage a customer, how to deliver, all of that stuff.
Okay.
And so people underestimate all of that and just apply for consulting roles and they can't get anywhere.
Mhm.
But it's doable, but they need to understand what the obstacles are. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. Especially midstream, it's harder to.
Much harder,
Yeah.
much harder. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Dilip, for your insights on this topic. And I hope my viewers will benefit from it. Next time, we'll be back with another interesting topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Upesh. I enjoyed this conversation.